You are listening to the International Radio Report. Your reactions are much appreciated. Feel free to send them to radioreport@yahoo.com. That is radioreport@yahoo.com. Thank you.
Welcome to the International Radio Report for Sunday, May the 14th, 2023, here on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal. My name's Sheldon, here with Jill, and we thank you for joining us. Several ways to reach us or follow us online. Our email address, radioreport@yahoo.com. We are live streaming and archived at ckut.ca, which is the website of CKUT Radio here in Montreal, 90.3 FM. Our Facebook group has one new member this week. We welcome Larry Strickland to the group at 910 members. You can find us on Facebook. Simply search for International Radio Report. And our YouTube channel, very popular, 827 subscribers. You can catch our latest show and back issues of the show on the YouTube channel. Just search for International Radio Report on YouTube. And we always welcome your comments. And actually, we're going to start off the show this week with some comments and a question that we received from some of our listeners.
Our first comment is from Greg Gaick, and it's via the International Radio Report Facebook group. And he says, "You have interesting news about shortwave stations, and your YouTube videos are awesome." So thank you so much, Greg. We have a comment from Brad Lowe, K5BDL in Tyler, Texas. So this is in response to our coverage of car companies that are not including AM radios in new cars. He says, "Great show today as always. I listened live while working in the microbiology lab this morning. I'll certainly be contacting my representative in Congress to keep AM radio in vehicles." And we got a question from Muhammad, and he says, "Good evening, gentlemen. Hope all are doing well. I have one question. How to get a list of frequencies of all world radio stations, irrespective of radio locations?" So the best thing to do is we're going to post some links of a couple of websites that you can get schedules. One that is fairly easy to remember, the web address, the URL, is www.short-wave.info. That one is a nice one because it's easy for any beginner to see the stations. You can search on the page. You have a map of the transmitter location and the target areas. And, of course, there's other ones, including one which is eibispace.de. But we'll post the links. It's going to be easier to get there.
You know, that's one of the differences about shortwave listening that people just getting started may not understand, that, you know, your conventional AM and FM radio stations, they're always on the same frequency. They're usually there 24 hours a day. Shortwave doesn't work like that. No. You've really got to work at it and use these schedules and research and find your way around, know what times to listen and on what frequencies. So that's a really good question, especially for new people getting into it. You know, sometimes you hear us talking about frequencies and all that and wonder, you know, how do these guys know where all this stuff is? Well, we have to go use those sites as well. So thanks for the question. Our first story is an interesting one. We want to thank Alex Kaminsky in Ohio who sent this to us. It comes, it's written by Mary Kirby back on April 19th from a webpage called Runway Girl Network. And this seems to be a lady who's very interested in aviation and has got some really interesting things on the website. And the headline is Inmarsat Satcom Safety Services return for Asia Pacific after an outage. Inmarsat's aircraft safety and other L-band Satcom services for the Asia Pacific region are operable again following an outage of the firm's I-4F1 satellite, which forced operators to switch to, guess what, high-frequency HF radio. The news comes as a relief to operators, pilots, aviation enthusiasts, and tech-savvy flyers. London-based Inmarsat explained that the L-band satellite suffered a partial loss of power which invoked automatic procedures on the satellite that led to the suspension of service for East Asia and the Pacific region, starting at 21:14 UTC on Sunday, April the 16th. While Inmarsat is continuing to optimize performance and address some specific residual issues on the I-4F1 satellite, it says all safety services have now been restored, including the resumption of classic aero service for aircraft safety, voice, and data. Maritime safety services, which had been transferred to contingency satellites in line with the IMSO-approved operational process, were transferred back to I-4F1 yesterday. That was April the 18th, following reactivation of Inmarsat C, it says. Other marine services, including the company's fleet broadband service, have also been restored. GSPS satellite phone services are still being addressed, however. When aircraft are flying over oceans and out of range of VHF, pilots use satellite-based connectivity to communicate with both air traffic controllers and their employers' ground-based operations. Inmarsat's fleet of L-band satellites, and indeed Iridium's L-band LEO satellite network, enable these sorts of cockpit communications and safety services. When SATCOM is not available or another method is needed, HF voice is used by pilots for position reporting, as occurred during the Inmarsat I-4F1 satellite outage. It is not immediately clear if expanded separation of aircraft was also employed during the incident. Perhaps in time, regulators would consider permitting the cabin connectivity pipe, KUKA band, on board many aircraft to serve as backup in a pinch. Space and satellite consultant Christian Furr von der Ropp reckons that this path makes sense, especially now that more LEO networks are available. So this is something that a lot of people probably don't know about. This can happen when technology fails. It can also happen when these geomagnetic storms and sunspot activity, flares that we talk about a lot on the show happen, where communications get disrupted. So it becomes tricky. And I remember talking to a friend who was a pilot, and he said it actually got kind of scary when these communications went down. They had to work whatever they could with HF radio. Instead of communicating long distance, they would literally skip like a stone over water from plane to plane to plane until they could reach a ground station. So here is a case where fairly sophisticated satellite technology was not working, and they had to fall back on the old standby HF radio.
There's a story that I heard somewhere where they were actually talking about how new ships that are being constructed, actually the equipment they put in omit to have HF radios. And there's been a lot of people saying there shouldn't be, there should be HF just as a backup. If you don't want to use it, it's fine. When satellites work, I'm pretty sure it works great. If satellites fail, well, having HF might actually be interesting. I mean, we still have a lot of monitoring of shortwave marine frequencies across the world. Almost every country monitors the frequencies. I think it's important that we at least have that backup option available. So we have a story about the Deutsche Welle that's turning 70. And this is via Alokesh Gupta, New Delhi, India, and Glenn Hauser's World of Radio. It's an audio clip that we're going to play for you about 70 years of the Deutsche Welle from Germany.
The German international broadcaster Deutsche Welle is turning 70. This birthday comes at a time when in many countries, freedom of the press is under attack, just as it was during the Cold War.
In northeastern Congo, on our way to a community where thousands of internally displaced people have fled violence between arms.
DW delivers unbiased information to people around the world.
"70 years. DW.
To get the job done, journalists in Bonn, Berlin, and around the world work 24/7 every day of the week. We realize that carrying out our task has become more important these past few years. We are confronted with obstacles that stem from the current war in Europe. We know that because of this, we are under great pressure to retain freedom of the press. Because of this, what we do is incredibly important. This is especially the case concerning reports on Russia's attack on Ukraine.
Russian enemies are just roughly about 150 meters.
There are nearly 30 journalists stationed in Ukraine alone, so that DW can report straight from where the action is. DW has 18 offices around the world, more than ever before in the 70-year history of the German broadcaster.
These kinds of stories.
No, and unpopular. That's right, these began in early...
Hier ist die Deutsche Welle.
On May 3rd, 1953, DW launched a German language program on shortwave radio. It soon offered shows in other languages as well. DW also began broadcasting in Asia. And listeners on the African continent could soon choose from a constantly expanding palette of languages on offer. Then, Germany was confronted with a historical change. The Berlin Wall was erected in 1961. The division of the world into Western and Soviet-influenced countries was set in stone. In 1965, DW launched a new broadcasting operation in Kigali, Rwanda. The voice of Germany was heard around the world, from across the African continent to Asia. Then in 2015, DW stopped broadcasting via shortwave radio. Media began to change. The transition from analog to digital happened quickly. The internet and social media platforms became increasingly important in the world of international journalism. I think that international journalism is on the brink of a great challenge. Information must remain available to everyone. Autocrats around the world are attempting to block or censor free information. And I believe this is a threat to international journalism. Everyone who believes in the values of democracy and plurality must work together to help free speech remain available to our listeners. The goal is to offer content on every platform DW's audiences use: the internet, video, radio, and TV. And shows are available in 32 languages. Almost 300 million people around the world tune in to DW's programs. DW is turning 70. The information it broadcasts today is more important than ever before.
So that is an interesting clip. It's nice to see 70 years. There's a little mistake in that clip. The fact that they say that shortwave is gone from the Deutsche Welle since 2015, it's not true. Yes, there's no French or English. Don't search for Spanish or languages that were once on the Deutsche Welle. But they have several times a day broadcasts to Africa in the Hausa language. So that's just a little correction I wanted to add here. They still are on shortwave. You might even still hear that interval signal they played during the clip. But nice to see 70 years. It's just a little sad to see that they've cut off shortwave in an extensive way. So what's happening with our sun? Well, our sun is active. There's a lot of little flares here and there, coronal mass ejections that happened that hit Earth. So we've been off and on into geomagnetic storming, and we knew that there were a few coming this week after some of the different solar flares. And so this is making conditions a little rough on the bands. I monitor the amateur bands and the shortwave bands quite a lot, and I've noticed that it was a little rough this week to get some of the signals, especially some that I'm used to, like Radio New Zealand. Wasn't all that great many evenings this week. And I guess in the week ahead, it's going to pretty much be the same conditions, off and on, good or bad conditions, depending on the flaring and on possible. There is a pair of sunspots, of course, that are already on the surface that are pretty good chances of flares, AR 3296 and 3297. So disruption in communications are possible. Sunspot number 152 and the solar flux 163. There's no significant coronal holes to add to the uncertainty of the conditions this week. But whatever happens, don't do like what I see all the time on the Facebook groups. Look at just numbers on a website, turn on a radio, and listen.
This is Glenn Hauser. On the air since 1987, you're tuned to the International Radio Report. 30 minutes of radio about radio, every Sunday morning on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal, and live streaming around the globe at ckut.ca.
In our next story, we take you to India. This comes from T. Carter Ross for Radio World. The headline is Indian Government Backs FM in Phones. The Indian Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology is calling on cell phone manufacturers to ensure FM radios are active in their products. On April the 28th, the ministry advised the Indian Cellular and Electronics Association and the Manufacturers Association for Information Technology of the government's desire to see an increase in the number of cell phones that can receive over-the-air FM signals. During the last 4 to 5 years, there's been a drastic fall in mobile phones with FM tuner feature, thereby affecting not only the ability of the poor to get free FM radio services, but also the government's ability to disseminate real-time information during emergencies, disasters, and calamities, stated the advisory memo, which was signed by Asha Nangia, a group coordinator for electronics hardware at the ministry. The advisory noted the valuable role FM radio played in India's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the importance of the medium during natural disasters. Given the need to ensure listeners can receive timely information during emergencies, the ministry wrote, it should be ensured that whenever the mobile phone is equipped with an inbuilt FM radio receiver function or feature, that function or feature is not disabled or deactivated, but is kept enabled and activated in the mobile phone. Further, it is advised that if the FM radio receiver function or feature is not available in the mobile phones, it may be included. The ministry called on the two associations to distribute the advisory to all mobile phone manufacturers on a priority basis. No timeline or enforcement measures were mentioned in the advisory. Although many smartphones include a chip capable of receiving FM signals, not all manufacturers or carriers configure their devices to support FM reception. In the 2010s, concerted efforts were made in the United States and Canada, but FM remains an uncommon or at least under-publicized feature on some new smartphones. And I've seen that myself. I remember our friend Janice had a new phone. There was actually no mention of whether it even had the chip in it or not, or how to activate it if it was there. So it's not a new thing that's happening in India. This has happened literally all over the world.
Yep, and most phones have it deactivated when they have one. The only way to know is really to just Google your phone model and with FM radio and see if it pops up in a list of phones that do have an FM radio chip. My old Samsung Galaxy phone had an FM chip, and I actually installed an app to listen to FM radio, and it worked. But it worked only after a year and a half after the phone was released. They made an update that actually turned on the chip. Wow. Before that, it was impossible to do it, which means manufacturers need to, just make sure that it's on. But they also need to include an app. I've noticed that one of the only apps that was available for FM radio in phones doesn't exist anymore, which means if you have an FM radio, the manufacturer will have to put an app in the phone also to have it work. So it's getting more and more difficult. I had a friend that was on the market for a new phone, and FM radio was actually important because when he works He wants to have FM radio in his earbuds. He asked me, he said, hey, you know a phone that I could purchase that has FM? And he said, it's more and more difficult to find one. So that would be actually something that should be mandatory. There's an FM chip. It should have an app and work to listen to FM radio. As for those that don't have an FM chip, well, maybe just clearly say, well, we don't have an FM radio on this one, so people can do a good choice when they go and buy a new phone.
It makes me wonder why they would be reluctant to automatically activate it or to not tell you that it's there.
I've heard that it's mostly the carriers that don't like it more than the manufacturer of the phone itself, which would mean, well, we make money because when you're streaming, you're using data, going to push people to pay for data. And that would be logical for me to be the reason.
So in other words, they don't want you using their system and their device for something that they don't get paid for.
Exactly.
What a surprise.
So we have another story about All India Radio that will only be referred to as Akashvani. That's by the Indian press. And it's a little audio clip we have that we're going to listen to right now.
All India Radio to only be referred to as Akashvani, a brief history of the Indian public broadcaster. All India Radio officially came into being in 1936. In its heyday, it was a staple in millions of Indian households, bringing news, sports and entertainment to homes across the country, even including its underserviced hinterlands. The Centre, on Wednesday, May 3rd, ordered that public broadcaster, previously known as All India Radio, AIR, be exclusively referred to as Akashvani in all broadcasts and programs. Previously, the two names were used interchangeably. The aforesaid statutory provision, which has replaced the name of AIR with Akashvani, may be brought to the attention of all so that names and titles get in tune with the provisions of the Prasar Bharati Act, 1990, passed by Parliament, the order said. This was long pending and in line with the law which came into being in 1997. Our listeners have more of a connect with Akashvani and so we are ridding ourselves of colonial baggage that may have persisted, Gaurav Dwivedi, the CEO of Prasar Bharati, the parent organization of Akashvani, said. However, the public broadcaster's social media handles continue to mention AIR or All India Radio. AIR has a rich history. In its heydays, it was a staple in millions of Indian households, bringing news, sports and entertainment to homes across the country, even to its underserviced hinterlands. A journey which began a century ago. After Guglielmo Marconi sent out the first radio transmission in 1895, it took over 2 decades for radio broadcasting to become commercially available. In India, the Radio Club of Bombay sent out the first commercial transmission in 1923. In the same year, the Calcutta Radio Club was started and a year later, radio broadcasts reached Madras with the Madras Presidency Radio Club. Early years of radio broadcasting were marked with fascination about the new technology and a constant state of financial precarity. The ambitious Indian Broadcasting Company, IBC, came into existence in 1927, only to face bankruptcy in 1930. It was not until the government stepped in that there was a degree of stability in radio programming. In 1930, the Indian State Broadcasting Service, ISBS, under the Department of Industries and Labour, commenced its operations on an experimental basis. Senior BBC producer Lionel Fielden was appointed as India's first controller of broadcasting in 1935 and brought major advancements to the programming. Finally, on June 8, 1936, ISBS became All India Radio. A year later, AIR was brought under the Department of Communications, and 4 years later, under the Department of Information and Broadcasting, now called the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, under whose jurisdiction it remains till date. A story of exponential growth. At the time of independence, India was left with 6 radio stations, at Delhi, Lucknow, Bombay, Madras and Trichy. 3 others, Peshawar, Lahore and Dhaka, had gone to Pakistan. In terms of coverage, AIR covered just 2% of India's land area and reached just 11% of its population. To truly be All India Radio, AIR had to grow, and grow it did. Today, with a network of over 262 radio stations, AIR is available to 92% of India's area and nearly all of its population. It broadcasts in 23 languages and 146 dialects, catering to India's diverse demographics and tastes. It also has an external services division which broadcasts in 11 Indian and 16 foreign languages, reaching out to more than 100 countries. Its news services division broadcasts 647 bulletins daily for a total duration of nearly 56 hours. FM broadcasting began in 1977 in Chennai and expanded during the 1990s. Today, air 18 FM stereo channels, largely targeting the urban audience. Nostalgia. Thy name is Akashvani. The name Akashvani was adopted by Air in 1956. It was used interchangeably with Air, often to specifically refer to its Hindi broadcasting. For many Indians today, the Akashvani jingle evokes the memories of a bygone time when Indians would wake up to the sounds of the jingle at the break of dawn and start their day with their programming. The jingle was composed by Walter Kaufmann. Born in Carlsbad, present-day Czech Republic, Kaufmann trained in music in Prague and Berlin before fleeing Nazi persecution and landing in India in the mid-1930s. He joined Air in 1937 and worked as a director of music in Bombay. During his time in India, he extensively researched native musical traditions and even worked in Bollywood. Broadcasting modern Indian history. More than anything else, Air's place in history is cemented due to its role in communicating momentous events in India's recent history. Prior to the advent of television or digital media, it was radio that was the medium through which Indians consumed news, cricket or entertainment. Whether it be Jawaharlal Nehru's iconic Tryst with Destiny speech in 1947 or Kapil Dev's mythical 175-run knock in 1983, it was Air which brought these events to homes across the country.
So this is interesting to see that they are going to do a name change. It's going to be interesting to listen to the shortwave services to see how soon it's going to happen. And here, if you hear anything else, if you're listening to an all India radio frequency and all you hear is Akashvani, that is all India radio apparently.
Yeah, I think I saw a report or two already that's come across saying some people were monitoring and did hear them dropping the All India Radio ID on the stations now, which is kind of sad, I think.
Yeah.
We all grew up with shortwave listening to All India Radio. It was always one of those exotic catches.
Oh, yeah.
And you heard that sitar music playing and the interval signal and the All India Radio name. So anyways, things change. So there's a new name to listen for, Akashvani. And we were trying to figure out if that was an automated voice or not on that clip.
Yeah, it sounded like a Microsoft voice, like, the Indian version of Cortana or something.
Yeah, neat that it came across. I had to stop and listen carefully because I wasn't really sure if it was automated or not.
So we have upcoming ham radio contests.
Have a few for you coming up. Gee, we had a new king installed in Great Britain. Well, there's a King of Spain contest coming up. His Majesty King of Spain contest in CW. 1200 Zulu May 20th to 1200 Zulu May 21st. It's organized by the Union of Spanish Radio Aficionados. 10 through 160 meters, and it is a CW contest.
There's the Arkansas QSO Party, 1400 Zulu May 20th to 02 Zulu May 21st, organized by the Noise Blankers Radio Group. 160 through 6 meters, all modes, CW, SSB, and digital.
And the 58th Annual Baltic Contest, 2100 May 20th to 0200 Zulu May 21st. That's organized by the Lithuanian Radio Sports Federation. It's 80 meters only, and both CW and SSB.
And we are out of time.
We thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions or comments, we enjoyed reading your questions or comments this week. If you have any, just send them along to us, radioreport@yahoo.com, or you can post them on our Facebook group as well. Always nice to hear from our listeners. We'll be back again next Sunday with the next edition of our program, the International Radio Report on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.
This is the General Overseas Service of All India Radio.